Good morning, Internet. This is Alan from Woodcrest Bonsai. Today I'm going to do a quick update on my Podocarpus collection. And I'm sorry to report that I don't have one single Podocarpus bonsai. But I have all kinds of pre-bonsai or future bonsai. So I'm going to start with this big one. This is the largest one I have. The trunk is absolutely magnificent. It's about as big around as a soda can. There's my hand. So, and then it splits very quickly into 4 or 5, and then those split. And so I'm planning on doing air layers on this woody part here. So I could conceivably get 6 or 8 air layers from this guy. I plan on reducing the size of this guy considerably. However, I purchased this guy as a landscape plant in a full-size 30-gallon pot. Right now, it's in a 30-gallon pot that's been cut down to only about 6 inches. It's also lying right on the ground. And it has struggled mightily. Oh, and anybody know what these are? They're super fragrant and they bloom at night. Let's see if anybody knows what they are. They're just a giant weed, actually. But anyway, I worked on this tree quite a few months ago, and finally, we're seeing some new growth. A little tiny bit right there, and some in here. Another piece right there. So it has really struggled. But the reason is because I took off far more roots than I did the top. So the roots were feeding so much more of the top foliage, and it struggled. So I think it's finally, I'm breathing a sigh of relief. So here's the apex. Has some very nice brand new growth. The monster tree over here is Goliath, crepe myrtle, and the guy in the back is the creature, Green Island ficus. But then you can see this guy has a lot of brown, mostly leaves though. All the tips, even if they don't have brand new growth, are still all alive. It did not die back per se. It just dropped a lot of leaves. So I'm hoping to, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do the air layers this year, because it really needs to just recover from the torture that I gave it by cutting off far more roots than top. So I'm probably just going to let it grow. I may do some experimental air layers in another month or two. Right now it's the end of April. But it really needs to grow and be much healthier before I really start to do anything drastic with it. So that's the big monster guy. Two years ago I collected seed from a female Podocarpus, because Podocarpus are dioecious, which means that they have separate male and female plants. So if you have a male plant, you never get seed, and if you have a female plant and there is a male around to pollinate it, you always get seed. So these are seedlings in another, this is a 10-gallon nursery pot, chopped down to about 4 inches. And as you can see, they are growing beautifully. They have all kinds of new growth, mainly because they haven't even been messed with. They've never been messed with. The seed was planted, they grew as little babies. They grew to about, oh God, can we see actually? Yeah, about in here, about right in there was last year's growth, and then all of this is this year's growth. So that's the difference between ravaging a plant by chopping the roots way too far back and letting them just grow. And they've never had any kind of root pruning or anything. Now there is, well, there's weeds, but there's a lot of empty space in this pot. And those are trees that I did take out of this container and plant them in individual containers. But I also have 2 more of these larger nursery pots cut down to be trays of the same batch. They were all collected as seed at the exact same time. So we'll go look at those 2, the other 2. So these babies here, we got a parrot's beak in the way. These babies here are exactly the same age as the last one I just showed you. And they have not had anything even removed, so they're just jammed up in there. And I don't apologize for the weeds. If I had to pull weeds where everything was pristine perfect with no weeds, I'd never get anything done. And then here's another group. You can see all the beautiful new growth. These as a group are smaller. And, you know, Podocarpus grows so slowly, there's no way I'm going to be styling these or doing anything with them for a few more years anyway. So keeping them in these trays, even though now they're 2-year-old seedlings, for me, is, for one thing, it saves space. Because I have a lot of space, but not that much. And they're still perfectly alive. And, you know, when the time comes, I will remove them from the trays and grow them on. And I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. Here's a good example. Aphids love Podocarpus. So can we see the little aphids on there? I don't use poison typically. This is another one, another growing tip that's deformed because of aphids, although you don't really see too many. I usually just blast them with water. When I'm watering, I water with a nozzle on the end of a hose. And so I usually just will grab the apex like this, and with my other hand, which I'm now holding the camera with, I just blast the guys off of there. And every now and then I see some ladybugs. And of course, ladybugs are predatory on aphids. So that's another batch of Podocarpus. I'm almost embarrassed to show you this group. These were cuttings that I took from 4 that I have in the ground that are now about 6 feet high. And I mean, they just all fallen over. This is kind of like one of those areas, well, whatever, they'll get to it sooner or later. This one here is pretty decent. These are growing in a lot more shade, so the leaves are much longer. And here's a seedling ficus. I'm going to do a video on ficus soon. And I get seedlings just all over the place. So these cuttings, the jury's still out. And you know, because they didn't perform all that well, I've just sort of left them. I mean, you know, most of them are just almost horizontal. They're just not even doing anything. But they're still alive. They're still there. At some point, I'll figure it out. Probably not today. And I may as well show you this one. Can we bring them up out of here? This is also a cutting from that very same batch, but this is by far the most developed. It rooted the best, and it's actually got some interesting movement. This could be forced into being a bonsai, you know, premature bonsai potting. But that is the exception. Most of the cuttings just really haven't done much anything. But he's kind of cool. These are seedlings that came out of the first batch of other seedlings where most of the container was empty, I pulled these out of that container. And that's why the empty space is there, because these are all the seedlings that I took out of there. And I didn't do any root pruning, and I did some pinching of the top. So like right here, you can see I pinched the top off. And so we've got some growth. They've popped in different places, but they're so slow. And yes, I have weeds. Welcome to Woodcrest Bonsai. And then I have some, runts. But you can always turn runts into mame. So they went into different containers. This group here, obviously, were what I considered the healthiest. So they went into ice cream containers. And then we have some in 6-inch bulb pans. Some in the little 3.5-inch. And there's another, I don't know why he's over here, in an ice cream container. And there's a couple of pretty nice ones. Get this parlor oak out of the way. So this guy's pretty nice too. He's probably the largest, healthiest one. So this is the same batch of seedlings that are in the 3 large nursery containers that have been cut down to be more of a tray. But they've just been pulled out and they're growing individually now. And last, but certainly not least, are these 4 that are, easily more than 6 feet high. And they've been cut back once. They're in the ground, quote unquote, but they are also, and yes, I have weeds all over the place. This group of weeds is going to go, and I'm going to plant things in the ground. I have an area here that's probably about 15 by 15, maybe a little bigger than that. And I'm going to get rid of all these weeds and plant a whole bunch of stuff in the ground. That's for another day. So these Podocarpus are growing beautifully. As you can see here, massive amounts of new growth. And if we look really close, gigantic amounts of aphids. And the aphids don't really limit the growth on trees this vigorous. But if we come down, which is going to be a chore for me, since I turned 69 in another month, bending over has become very interesting. But if we look, there's some pretty decent trunks in here. This trunk here is, well, there's my finger. So that trunk is about maybe 3/4 of an inch. And I do plan on attempting some air layers. So there's 4 of them in here. And if we look, they are in cheap storage trays that you buy from the dollar type store. And they're all in their own individual tray, which has a whole bunch of holes punched through. And then they're planted in the ground. So the root ball some of it will remain in the tray. And then the rest is moving into the ground, allowing them to get as tall as they are. And these are another one that I'm going to air layer very soon. And then if we look, they're all in a line right here, and then I'm going to continue the line with hardy material, and I think I'm going to take all this weedy area and plant a bunch of tropicals. And then in the winter, I'll build a frame that I can put plastic over when it gets cold and even give them a little bit of supplemental heat. So I have a lot of Podocarpus, but they're all young. These are the oldest ones. These 4 came from the same place as the other seedlings, but they're even a year older. And they've been grown in the ground and fertilized considerably. So these are by far the closest thing I have to finished trees. But not even close, really. At least 2 more years, maybe even 3. I want to do the air layers. then I'm going to cut them way back and take more of an inventory. Like I said, it's really hard for me to get down there and really look at the actual structure of the trunk way down at the soil level, because it's hard to get back up. So if you're young and strong and virile and enthusiastic, do that stuff now, man. Because when you get old, you start creaking. I'm trying not to complain. And Podocarpus are a very primitive plant, and I don't think they're actually considered tropical, but they're super popular in Florida. As a hedge plant, you see them almost everywhere. In fact, there's one apartment complex that I think has the dwarfs, because there is a dwarf form. Actually, the big one, the biggest big one that started this video is a dwarf, as far as like the leaves and whatnot. But they have them trimmed as hedges, and they're probably 10, 15 years old, and oh my God, the bonsai thief in me wants to just go dig them up. There's probably 1,000, because it's a huge apartment complex. You know, what do? You go to the office manager and say, hey, let me dig up your trees. Let me dig up those shrubs, and I'll plant new ones for nothing. And watch their eyes roll and go, oh, what is wrong with you, buddy? Anyway, yes, lusting for urban, what's it called, Yamadori? But they are spectacular little guys, because, they're only maybe 1.5 feet high, and they've been in the ground 10, 15 years. So, anyway, there's my Podocarpus. Maybe we'll go back to the big one to end. So we're now back at the original tree, the big one, which is considered a dwarf, even though it's by far the largest tree I have. But I took a cutting from one of the 4 that's in the ground in the storage containers, and you can just see just how big the leaves are compared. So this is your basic landscape Podocarpus that you see everywhere around town where I live here. And then this is the dwarf, so you can really see the difference in the size of the leaves. Much, 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 much smaller leaves on the dwarf form. So there's my Podocarpus collection. None as bonsai, but that's part of the process. If you don't start somewhere, then you'll never get there. And yes, I could go take 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, maybe even $1,000 and go buy a beautiful, big, finished tree. But that's not who I am. I like to grow them. This guy here cost me $150. And the rest of them, all those seedlings, I just got them for nothing. The guy at the house who has the female tree, he didn't care. I just went and got the seed. So, if you live in I don't want to say tropical, because they are, Podocarpus are super cold hardy. There is absolutely no amount of cold, even drastic 1,000-year cold, that's going to affect Podocarpus where I live here. It could get down to probably 20, and the trees in the landscape would all be just perfectly fine. So there we go. That's my Podocarpus collection, and I hope it maybe gave you some inspiration. I may take that one that's probably the most developed of the seedlings and just give it the old premature bonsai potting, give it a little wire, and pretend it's finished. I get into moods like that, and there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. Play with your trees, enjoy your trees. If somebody says, you're not doing it right, tell them to, well, okay. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Podocarpus. And if I live long enough, I should have some pretty cool bonsai.